Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Smilegate headquarters. Today we're going to be talking about Abyss Floor 115. Does anyone have any ideas?
Yes, sir. I think today we should just it's a fifth one, so let's put a whole bunch of rewards on it and then let's just add as much RNG as possible to really make them feel it.
Okay. So first up for this team, you're going to notice that once again we see Adventurer Ras. Adventurer Ras has been just so useful with the dual attacks off of that S2, especially when you can burn it, and no one's really punishing us all that hard for using that so far in all of kind of Abyss 111 through 120. So, noting that, we are going to keep using Adventurer Ras. We do have Aureus on him just to be able to give him extra mitigation for the team. In general, you'll notice if there's anything we've changed stat-wise on Adventurer Ras for this, we did have him a little bit slower, still really bulky, but the biggest reason why was so that we could add more effect resist. There are a lot of poison debuffs that you really don't want to deal with in this, so the more that you can have good effect resist on all your units, the better. Next up, we have Kitty Clarissa, who, just like Adventurer Ras, has the ability to like double up on attacks with that highest attacker when she uses the S1 after using S3. Those two abilities are going to be her main two abilities that she's going to use for this particular floor. But let's take a look at the gear. You'll notice that she is pretty fast, pretty decently tanky, and a little bit bulky, especially for a bruiser unit. And then also a good amount of effect resist. Thankfully, she has a decent amount of effect resist built into her kit, so that does help. But more effect resist, again, to make sure you're not being poisoned is good. You'll notice we also have Warhorn on her for extra kind of like attack as well as CR push, which is really amazing. And then I believe she also has the EE to add extra healing whenever she does use that S1 as well. So all in all, really useful unit, and again, not being punished for using those dual attacks. We're going to use them every day that we can. So next up, we're going to have Sinful Angelica. There's obviously a pattern here that you're seeing of just like trying to drag along your highest attacker to go along with. Sinful Angelica is perfect for that. You'll note that we have Celestine here for extra heals when she's S1ing, as well as pretty bulky when you look at the stats. We do have like 16k health, 1500 defense, 211 speed, which isn't ultra slow, but it's not super fast either. It's kind of just around the same speed we had our Adventurer Ras. And then the biggest thing to note is the effect resist here at 192. We are going to be putting her up front so that essentially she's not going to get any poison ticks. That's the idea. Like, get that effect resist as high as you possibly can while not sacrificing bulk, and I think you're going to be in a pretty good spot with the character. The main reason Sinful Angelica is so useful here is in phase 1, she allows you to essentially only have to kill the mushroom one time rather than having to kill the mushroom like 3 to 4 times, because it has the ability to res itself 3 extra times, which is very, very, very frustrating, especially when you're trying to get through this relatively fast. So Singelica, super good for cheesing the mechanic of phase 1. She also has the bring along dual attacks. And one other thing that I'd like to note about mine is that I actually don't have I don't have any molas in this. I was going to say my S3 is not mola. I don't have any molas in this. So you can get away with that. Although if you wanted to make this fight a lot easier, you would literally put 1 mola point into the S3 to make sure to reduce the cooldown of the S3. Otherwise, this fight is just made so much easier with this character. Finally, to round out this composition, we have Fire Lidica, who is, just as important as Singelica for this fight, and you'll see why here in just a second. Couple things to note for her. She is using Bloodstone, so every time she is getting an attack off, she is also healing your team. The more heals you can get, the better, because of the just large AoE damage that happens every time that LQC does her like attack. Whenever she attacks, she just hits, and it hits so hard on the rest of your team. So having a lot of extra just like inherent heals while doing damage, big deal. One of the things that is also really nice about this is her EE. The EE adds an extra 5% combat readiness manipulation to her S1, so it essentially takes it from 10% base to a 15% base, and then if the enemy is debuffed, it goes up to 25% CR reduction, which is really, or like to basically knock them back 25%, which is really, really nice. All that said, if you look at the way she's geared, she is obviously on a rage set with the crit set. This is a similar set to what we've been using for a lot of our damage dealers that we bring along with the dual attacking teams. She is not necessarily super damagey, guys. Like really, again, a better set, you could do a lot more damage, making this a lot better. But the biggest thing to note here is that we kept the effectiveness at about 89%. I believe 85% is the play here because I'm pretty sure there's 100% ER on the actual boss. So having 85% there is going to give you the maximum chance that you're going to have to actually hit. And you need to hit for combat readiness manipulation to knock the boss backwards. So keep that in mind. If you don't at least have that 85% effectiveness mark, you're kind of trolling yourself. So make sure that you kind of get that done. It'll help a lot out in this fight. That's the team. There's a lot to why this team works well, but I'll explain that as we explain the fight here in just a second. All right, so as we move into phase 1 of this fight, you'll notice that there are a couple of different mushrooms here. There's the big one in the back, which is called the Mega Dust Mushroom, and then there's also just several dust mushrooms in front of him. This phase can be kind of hard to do if you don't use this particular team, but because we have this team, the biggest thing that must happen is we must make sure that Sinful Angelica has her S3 with the immortality buff on herself up when we actually take the final hit and kill the mushroom. That will extinct the mushroom and will make sure that it does not come back, because its natural is that it can revive up to 3 times after you kill it, which also removes 20 souls from your team. So in general, cheesing this mechanic is just better for having A, more chances at phase 2, but B, just not having to deal with more chances to be poisoned. As we said at the beginning, having a lot of ER is a big deal, so having things that can kind of just ignore a lot of that is really, really helpful. The main things that your characters are going to be doing during this phase, you're going to be using the S3 on Kitty Clarissa and then just S1ing directly into the big mushroom. You're going to skip all the other ads and just basically allow for your fire Lidica to constantly be pushing back the big mushroom. We're okay with taking damage from the little ones. The less chances that the big one gets a chance to attack, the less chances it hits its ultimate, which means just less damage across the board. You're basically doing the exact same thing with your Ras as well, but make sure that you just get enough so you can start cycling S2s rather than just doing the very first one. So probably start with an S3 and then move forward. Same thing again with the Singelica. Singelica, you want to basically just S3 and do the same thing with the S1s, constantly attacking into the main boss and letting the Fire Lidica do the same thing. Again, this is where you will find that there are some turns now that will just exist on your Singelica where you're not dual attacking if you basically don't have any kind of mola into that S3. So I highly suggest it to cut that down by a pretty significant margin, because it's going to make sure that that immortality buff is up more often, making it always easier to make sure that the execution happens and the extinction on this like final boss of phase 1, as well as it'll make a lot of phase 2 a lot easier. So pretty easy. Find your way through S1 pretty much the entire time into that main boss, and I'll see you guys in phase 2. So here in phase 2, there are going to be 2 new things that are going to pop up. You're going to have Little Queen Charlotte as the main boss, as well as a golden crystal, which I believe is called a golden Klineode, but we're just going to call it a gold crystal. Here's the basic gist. There are several abilities that they all have, but the things that make this RNG and the things that are important to note are this. On the gold crystal, that will always have an immunity on it, and it will always put up a permanent seal and a permanent restrict on your team. So that's just a thing that you're going to have to deal with the entire time. So if you have any teams outside of the one that we're looking at right now, just note that those 2 things may actually affect you and may actually be the reason why you're struggling. So keep that in mind. With the team that we have, we don't have to really think that much about either of these 2 things, because we're not actually trying to combat readiness push ourselves. We're actually trying to reduce combat readiness on the other team. So the restrict doesn't hurt us at all, which is really great, as well as sealing passives. None of our passives like really matter all that much for this particular thing, which is great. So that's something to note. The other biggest thing from the gold crystal is the Radiant Flash, which has a chance to decrease hit chance and remove souls from your team, and it will always attack the highest attacker first. So this is like part 1 of the RNG of this fight. Hopefully your miss chances like just because your decreased hit chance by 50% on those doesn't completely ruin you, and your not faithless Lidica, but fire Lidica actually is able to land a lot of the combat readiness manipulation on the boss. That could be a problem. For Little Queen Charlotte herself, some of the biggest things to think about for her is that she dispels all debuffs from the caster, and at the start of the turn, it dispels a buff from all enemies. At the start of the enemy turn, she also increases combat readiness of the caster by 15%. So she basically does most of her movement in combat readiness push on herself. So that's why having something that does some combat readiness pull or knockback with your fire Lidica is so important against her. The biggest thing to note is that every time she actually gets to take a turn, she uses the Will of Lemaire. And the first time it attacks, and it'll hit everybody for 25% of their current health. And then every single time after that, it will do an additional 25%. So you're getting 25, then 50, then 75. So by the time you get to the fourth attack, you're dead. So she cannot get turns. That's the main issue here, and why having a fire Lidica is so important, because you have the ability with her S3 to knock her all the way down from even 99% CR all the way down to 0 if you're able to land it on the S3. But I mean, just in general, just with the S1 and having her EE, having a pretty high potential of knocking her back almost 25% as long as she's debuffed with either defense break from a Ras or potentially speed down from a previous S3 that you pulled off with her. Other things that you should note, and this is the other RNG piece of this that's a little bit frustrating, is that Little Queen Charlotte is going to boost forward that 15% every time you attack her. So, unless you're bringing along Fire Lidica, don't attack her. And what I mean by that is, if you're Kitty Clarissa, if you don't have Loveliness up, don't hit her, hit the Golden Crystal. Same thing with Angelica. If you don't have up your Immortality, then you want to make sure you hit the Golden Crystal, and otherwise, if it is up, you would hit the boss. And then similarly with a Ras, you're going to want to, if you can actually burn an S2 to keep those kind of rolling along, those are perfect because you're doing a dual attack, and then you want to hit the boss. Otherwise, everything else, try to do that into the crystal, because that way she doesn't boost as much. Every time she gets attacked, she has a 20% chance. This is the she being Little Queen Charlotte, 20% chance to actually just hit you anyways and boost herself 15%. So depending on how lucky or unlucky you are, this may happen a lot or very, very, very little. Hopefully, for the sake of your completion one, it just happens very little and you're able to get through it pretty quick. The only other thing to think about with Little Queen Charlotte is she does have greatly decreased damage received. When attacked, damage received increases proportion of the caster's combat readiness. So obviously, it's all based on where she sits on the CR bar, is how much extra damage she's going to take. And because you just want to manipulate her the whole time, you're not so much worried about that as you are, hey, is she about to take a turn? Okay, if she's about to take a turn, my next Fire Lidica attack needs to be to use an S3 and knock her backwards. Otherwise, if she's on a decent spot on the CR bar, I'm just going to continue to hit her with an S1 and just keep slowly knocking her back until she finds her way all the way down to the end. All in all, not a terribly hard fight. You'll notice that there are several times where I get really lucky, and there are several times where I get extremely unlucky, and Little Queen just gets to take turns. I want to say she hits either 2 or 3 times on this attempt, but this is only our second or third attempt anyways, maybe even our first. I can't even remember with this team. It wasn't very many before we actually took it down. So this team has a lot of control. It's very, very, very good against this particular boss. And even though there may be other things in the future or some things today that may actually also still work on this boss, this team is extremely, extremely consistent. So that even if things get messed up, and everything goes haywire for a while, which does happen in this attempt, it can actually sort of even itself out and finish itself up towards the end pretty easily. So keep making sure that you, again, have Loveliness up on your Kitty Clarissa. Your Immortality is up as much as possible on your Angelica, and the S2s are constantly getting burnt on your Ras, so that you're able to constantly get dual attacks and constantly send this boss packing all the way back to the grave. So I hope this helped. Super glad to have you guys with us here at Level Up Together. We have a lot of big changes coming in the future, but in the meantime, we got more Abyss guides coming right at you guys. This was 115, 116 coming soon. If you guys are new, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. All of those things absolutely help the channel a ton, as well as commenting. If you guys have any like positive or uplifting comments to like put in the comments as well, that may be like either useful to somebody else with a different team, or honestly just like, hey, this was my successes that I found. What do you guys think? All of that kind of stuff helps to build community and pushes that algorithm, boys. So we'll see you guys in the next one. Love you. Peace.